He's a billionaire used to power. She's the maid who thinks she's invisible. But one accidental moment shatters the walls between them and reveals a raw, unexpected connection. Adrian Blake never meant to fall for Sophie Lane, yet her quiet strength haunts him, and her vulnerability awakens something he thought was long dead. As they navigate secrets, social divides, and a love that defies rules, one question lingers: can two broken souls find a home in each other? Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Adrian Blake wasn't supposed to be home that afternoon. The flight from Tokyo had landed early, and rather than inform his staff, he decided to enjoy a rare moment of solitude by slipping quietly into his estate. The air inside was still and cool, the kind of silence he often craved after days of boardroom battles and press interviews. At 36, Adrian had built an empire from grit and vision, yet he found no comfort in accolades anymore. Home was just another empty corner of his life, filled with curated furniture and soulless perfection. He tossed his suit jacket onto the arm of the couch, loosened his tie, and headed upstairs with the intention of taking a shower. The light in the hallway flickered slightly as he passed, but it wasn't the bulb that caught his attention. It was the sound: running water. Not from his bathroom, but the guest one at the end of the east corridor. He frowned. That wing was supposed to be unused. The staff wouldn't be careless, would they? Adrian moved quietly, his footsteps muffled against the thick Persian rug. The sound grew louder, steady, deliberate. Water splashing? A faucet left on? A leak? He reached the door and, without thinking, pushed it open. What he saw froze him in place. Sophie Lane stood before the bathroom mirror, her back to him, wrapped in nothing but a thin layer of steam and glistening droplets. Her hair clung to her shoulders, still wet, and she was completely unaware of his presence. She was wiping the fog from the glass with the side of her hand, humming faintly under her breath, a song he didn't recognize. It wasn't the nudity that stole his breath. It was the vulnerability, the sheer, unguarded stillness of her. In all the months Sophie had worked in his house, she'd been nothing but quiet efficiency. Always in uniform, always careful. She was the kind of person you noticed only when something wasn't done. But here, now, she was human in a way Adrian hadn't expected to witness. He should have looked away, should have said something, should have left. But his voice caught in his throat, and his feet refused to move. Then, as if time had snapped back into motion, Sophie turned. Their eyes locked. Her expression shifted instantly from serenity to shock. She gasped, stumbled backward, and snatched the towel hanging by the counter, clutching it around herself with trembling fingers. "Mr. Blake? I didn't know." Her voice cracked, her eyes wide with disbelief and shame. Adrian blinked, snapping out of his haze. "I'm sorry," he muttered, stepping back, raising his hands as if that might undo the moment. I didn't know anyone was in here." Sophie's face was flushed crimson, her chest rising and falling quickly. "I thought the east wing was empty," she whispered. "It usually is." He tried to hold her gaze but failed. His mind was spinning. This was a mistake. He turned and left the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Down the hall, his hands shook as he raked them through his hair. What just happened? In his office, he tried to return to the stack of contracts awaiting his signature, but the image of Sophie lingered. Her wet hair, the curve of her shoulders, the way her eyes held both fear and something else he couldn't place. He hated himself for remembering, for noticing. She was employee, off limits, untouchable. And yet something inside him had shifted, cracked open in the quiet steam of that room. Not lust, not exactly. It was something deeper, older. An ache he thought he'd buried beneath years of control and carefully drawn boundaries. He looked down at the untouched pen in his hand, the ink bleeding slightly on the paper beneath. Something had started today. And no matter how hard he tried, Adrian Blake knew he couldn't ignore it. The following morning unfolded like any other at the Blake estate, at least on the surface. The staff moved with their usual precision, silver polished, linens crisp, fresh orchids arranged in perfect symmetry across the grand dining hall. But beneath the polished routine, tension shimmered like heat waves on pavement. Sophie Lane felt it with every breath. She had hardly slept. Her dreams were muddled, twisting through flashes of steam, startled eyes, and the heavy silence that followed Adrian Blake's exit. She'd wanted to disappear, to vanish beneath the marble floors she cleaned. But morning came anyway. And so did the reality of facing him again. When she entered the study to leave the house report, a weekly summary the head staff submitted, Adrian was already inside, seated behind his desk. He looked up the moment she stepped in. Their eyes met. Time stalled. "Sophie," he said, his voice more careful than usual, like he was choosing every word in advance. She stood motionless, clutching the report to her chest like a shield. "Sir." He rose from his seat, not approaching her, just standing, as if it might somehow level the distance between them. "You don't have to explain anything. What happened yesterday? It was my fault. I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have walked in without knocking." Sophie shook her head quickly. "No, I wasn't supposed to be using that bathroom. I thought everyone would be out. It was careless of me." He watched her for a moment, then gestured to the chair across from his. "Sit." She hesitated, unsure if this was a reprimand or something else entirely. Finally, she moved forward and lowered herself slowly onto the edge of the chair. The space between them felt wider than the room itself. Adrian folded his hands on the desk. "This may be wildly inappropriate, but I need to ask you something." She looked up warily. "Yes?" He drew in a quiet breath. "Why do you always avoid me?" The question caught her off guard. Of all the things she expected, this wasn't it. "I don't avoid you," she said too quickly. Then, softer, "At least not intentionally." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "You barely speak when we cross paths. You never look me in the eye. And I know that's part of your job, professional boundaries and all. But sometimes I wonder if there's something more behind it." Sophie stared at the polished wood of his desk, her fingers curled tightly around the hem of her skirt. "You're my employer. This is your world, not mine. I try not to make myself visible because I know I'm not supposed to be seen." "That's not true," he said quietly. "You've been here nearly a year, and I've never once looked at you as just background. You move through this house like you're carrying the weight of something invisible. And I don't know why, but I notice." The honesty in his voice startled her more than the words. She lifted her gaze slowly. "Mr. Blake." "Adrian," he said gently. She blinked. "Adrian," she repeated, as if tasting the word, unsure if she was allowed to say it. "I appreciate your kindness, but this can't go further." He didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for anything. Not yet. I want to know you, the real you. Not the uniform or the tasks or the silence, just you." She stood then, a little too quickly. "I should go. There's a luncheon set up to finish." "Sophie," he said again, standing too. "There's a charity event next Friday, a gala. I'd like you to help coordinate it. It's small, private. I'll need someone I can trust." She hesitated at the door. "Are you sure that's appropriate?" "I'm certain," he replied. "Please say yes." And though every instinct told her to say no, to run, to build the walls higher, something in his voice made her pause. She nodded once, then slipped away without another word. Behind her, Adrian stood alone, watching the space where she'd stood just seconds before. Something had shifted again, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. The evening of the gala arrived more swiftly than Sophie anticipated, and with it, a wave of nerves she hadn't felt since her first week working at the estate. She stood in the modest staff quarters, staring at the simple navy dress she had pulled from the back of her closet. It wasn't new, far from it, but it was the nicest thing she owned. It hugged her frame just enough to make her feel feminine, but not so much as to draw attention. She pulled her hair back into a low, clean bun and took a long breath. She wasn't attending the gala as a guest, after all. She was there to serve. The grand ballroom of the Blake estate had transformed into a luminous haven. Crystal chandeliers gleamed above, and soft music drifted across the marble floor. The room buzzed with the city's elite. Politicians, investors, philanthropists. Sophie kept her head down, weaving through the crowd with practiced grace, ensuring the floral arrangements were aligned, the hors d'oeuvres circulating smoothly, the champagne always flowing. But Adrian saw her the moment she entered. She didn't know he was watching from the second-floor balcony, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand. When he finally descended into the crowd, he made a point to cross paths with her near the grand piano. "You came," he said, his voice barely above the music. I said I would, Sophie replied, eyes fixed on the tray in her hand. I'm here to work. I didn't ask you here to work, he said, stopping her in her tracks. I asked because I wanted you here. Near me. She stiffened, careful not to drop the tray. That's not my place. Adrian's gaze held hers for a moment too long, but he didn't argue. He merely gave her a small nod and moved away, disappearing into the sea of black suits and sequined gowns. For a while, Sophie convinced herself that was the end of it. She focused on her duties, circling through the guests like a shadow. But not everyone was as discreet as Adrian. It was near the bar when it happened. You're the help, right? Said a woman with sharp features and a dress that shimmered like glass. Her name was Cassandra Vaughn, an heiress and longtime fixture in Adrian's social circle. She narrowed her eyes at Sophie and smirked. Didn't realize Adrian started mixing business with leisure. The words stung more than they should have. Sophie felt her throat tighten, the heat rushing to her cheeks. I'm here to assist with the event, she replied quietly, attempting to turn away. But Cassandra wasn't done. Just be careful, sweetheart. Men like Adrian, they collect moments, not people. Don't mistake eye contact for meaning. Sophie didn't respond. She couldn't. Not without her voice breaking. What she didn't know was that Adrian had been watching the entire exchange from across the room, and in a rare moment of abandon, he crossed the ballroom in 5 determined steps. Is there a problem here? He asked, his tone low and sharp enough to cut steel. Cassandra turned, a practiced smile blooming. Oh, Adrian, no problem at all. Just giving some advice. Unsolicited advice to my staff? He countered, his eyes not leaving Sophie's face. Sophie is here because I trust her. And I suggest if you're offering anything less than respect, you keep it to yourself. The room around them seemed to hush. Cassandra's smile faded. Of course, she muttered before turning on her heels and walking away. Sophie stood frozen. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt exposed. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. Yes, I did, he replied, softer now. I won't let anyone diminish you. Sophie searched his eyes, trying to make sense of what she saw there. But before she could respond, another staff member called her name from across the room. She stepped back, nodded, and disappeared once more into the shadows. Adrian didn't stop her. Not yet. But his heart did something strange then, something unfamiliar. It clenched. Sophie didn't speak to Adrian for days after the gala. She avoided his gaze whenever they crossed paths, retreating into her tasks with renewed intensity. Her body moved through the estate like clockwork. Beds were made, dishes cleared, floors polished, but her mind was a mess. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Cassandra's words, saw Adrian's face when he stood up for her, felt the room pause in the wake of his defense. He had put himself on the line in front of the city's most powerful people. And she didn't know how to live with that. She began waking up earlier, finishing her tasks before he even left his bedroom. Anything to avoid conversation. Anything to maintain the line she'd drawn the moment she stepped into this house. But the silence didn't last. It was late one evening, just after the staff had cleared the last dinner tray, when she found him waiting at the far end of the hallway. He wasn't in a suit, not this time. Just slacks, a black shirt, sleeves rolled up, collar loose. He looked tired, human. I need to talk to you, he said. She froze. Mr. Blake, I have a lot too. Adrian, he corrected quietly. Please. She swallowed. I really think we should keep things professional. I agree, he said, though his eyes betrayed something else entirely. That's why I'm asking you something now, face to face, no games, no misunderstandings. She didn't move. What is it? Come with me, he said. Just a day, not here, not as staff, just you and me. Sophie stared at him like he had asked her to leap off a cliff. I can't. That wouldn't be appropriate. He stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough that she could feel the heat of his presence. I'm not trying to trap you, Sophie. I'm trying to get to know the person who's been haunting my thoughts since the moment I walked into that bathroom. Her breath hitched. That was a mistake. Maybe, he said, but it made me realize how little I actually know about you, and I want to. Against every warning in her mind, Sophie nodded once. One day, she said. That's all. They left early the next morning, before sunrise, driving up the coast in Adrian's car. The silence in the vehicle was not awkward. It was thoughtful, filled with music from the radio and the occasional glance, each one a question neither of them dared to ask yet. By the time they reached the small lakeside town Adrian had once vacationed in as a boy, the sun was warming the rooftops and the streets were just beginning to stir. They walked through the farmer's market. Adrian bought her a pastry and coffee. They sat on a bench and watched a dog chase its tail near the pier. And for the first time in what felt like years, Sophie laughed. Really laughed. Adrian watched her with a soft wonder in his eyes, like he was discovering something rare, something no stock portfolio or tech merger had ever given him. "You're different when you laugh," he said. "I feel different," she replied, lighter. He smiled, then looked out at the water. "I don't usually let anyone in. I don't know how to do this." Sophie turned to him. "Me neither." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. But as they walked back toward the car, Sophie's phone rang. Her face paled as she read the screen. "It's my brother," she said, her voice tight. "He's at the hospital. It's Dad. Something happened." Adrian didn't ask questions. He opened the car door and got them moving within seconds. By the time they reached the hospital, Sophie was shaking. Adrian stayed with her the whole time, waiting outside the room, making calls, paying for specialists, coordinating with the hospital staff. He never left her side. That night, as she sat beside her father's bed, hand trembling in his, she realized something terrifying. She needed Adrian. And that scared her more than anything else. The hospital lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a cold glow over the sterile white tiles. Sophie sat motionless beside her father's bed, her fingers loosely laced around his. Machines beeped steadily, rhythmically, as if mocking the storm of doubt roaring inside her chest. Her father was stable now, but the scare had rattled something loose in her. It wasn't just fear, it was the realization of how fragile everything was. And how, in the middle of that fragility, Adrian Blake had been there, unwavering, present. He hadn't said much during the chaos, hadn't tried to offer platitudes. Instead, he had quietly stood between her and every bureaucratic obstacle. When insurance wouldn't approve an MRI, Adrian made a single call. When the nurse hesitated at a specialist's availability, he leaned in and calmly handled it. She didn't ask him to do any of it, and yet, he did. As if it was the most natural thing in the world. But now, with the night deepening outside and her father's condition finally stable, the weight of what had happened settled over her like a heavy coat. She needed to leave, to breathe. She gently rose, kissed her father's forehead, and stepped into the corridor. Adrian was sitting on the bench, across from the vending machines, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, his eyes heavy with fatigue, but still alert. He stood the moment he saw her. "How is he?" he asked softly. Sophie nodded. "Better. They said it was a seizure brought on by stress. He'll need medication and rest, but he's out of danger." Relief passed over Adrian's face, subtle but real. "I'm glad." There was a long pause. "You didn't have to do all this," Sophie said, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't owe me anything." "I didn't do it because I owed you," Adrian replied, stepping closer. "I did it because I care about you." The words struck her like a soft blow to the chest. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But something inside her still clenched tight. "You don't know me, Adrian," she whispered. "You don't know what I carry, what I come from." "I'm trying to," he said. "You're the one always running." "I have to," she snapped, the tension finally bubbling to the surface. "Because people like you, men like you see someone like me and think you can fix her, mold her, make her fit into your world. But I don't fit. I'm not meant to." He didn't recoil. Instead, he stepped even closer, his voice low, steady. "I'm not trying to mold you, Sophie. I'm trying to see you, the real you. The one who's brave enough to carry the weight of an entire family, who works without complaint, who hides her tears behind laundry and polished silver." Sophie's lips parted, but nothing came out. "I know I have money. I know I come from a world where everything looks polished and clean, but I was raised by a man who believed emotions were weakness, who taught me to build walls so high that no one could ever see me. Until you." She looked away, eyes burning. Adrian's voice softened further. "You don't have to pretend around me. I don't want your perfection. I want your honesty, your fear, your hope." She turned back to him slowly. "And what happens when this, whatever this is, stops making sense to you? Then we figure it out together," he said simply. "I'm not going anywhere." Sophie blinked, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, not tightly, just enough to say, "I hear you. I'm still scared, but I'm not walking away." Weeks passed. Her father improved. The estate's rhythm returned, but Sophie no longer moved like a shadow. She was still quiet, still focused. But when Adrian walked into a room, she no longer disappeared. They shared glances that lingered, conversations that deepened. She no longer felt like the maid pretending to belong. One afternoon, she found a note tucked under her teacup. "You once told me you didn't believe in stories like these. Maybe we can write one anyway." She smiled. For the first time in her life, Sophie didn't feel like she was just surviving. She felt like she was starting. Moral of the story: sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very things that keep us from living. Sophie spent years hiding in plain sight, believing that her worth was tied to her role, her silence, her ability to not be seen. Adrian, on the other hand, lived in a fortress of control, mistaking emotional detachment for strength. But when two broken people choose to truly see each other, not for their titles, backgrounds, or scars, but for their humanity, that's when healing begins. This story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, unexpectedly, through a crack in routine or a soft moment of shared vulnerability. It teaches us that being seen, truly seen, is one of the bravest things we can allow ourselves to experience. And that letting someone in isn't a sign of weakness. It's a choice to believe in connection over fear, in possibility over the past. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be willing to show up as you are, and let someone do the same. And when you do, you might just find that the life you thought was out of reach was waiting for you all along. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from you. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt tales like this one. See you in the next story.